This is a sneak peek of the new revised Buyer Representation and Broker Compensation Agreement, BRBC, revised December 2024, slated to be released later this month in December. And I'm going to go through and point out the revisions made. They're highlighted in red to make them easier to identify. And not a lot has changed. They've cleaned some stuff up. And then there's one section that should be avoided. There's a danger zone. I'll point that out because in my opinion, the box in this danger zone should never be checked. And we'll just go through it. Now, of course, when the full form is officially released, I'll do a tutorial where I'll go through it and fill it out. But for now, I'm just going to go through and point out the revisions. All right, so you'll see the new date since this is coming out December of this year. Now down here, they cleaned up this area because if you remember on the last form that I'll bring over here, this was kind of confusing because you're checking boxes to include, but then you're checking a box to exclude a single family residence. That's weird, right? So they kind of clean this up just a little bit by putting parentheses around here. And then you have these check boxes down here. So they're trying to organize, although the thing's still kind of a mess. Okay. Now we go down here and they added this broker created compensation schedule because now, on this line, you can put in your 2.5% or whatever you want, a flat fee. And before it just said down here, it said see attached compensation schedule. Well, now it says broker created. I guess they want to be more specific that the brokers are going to create the compensation schedule. Fine. Okay. Then we move on. Now, one positive change, and if you look at my original tutorial, I even suggested writing this in. Remember how I said that you should seek to do exclusive relationships? Well, the trade-off was that you had to have a 30-day cancellation period with exclusive, which was kind of extreme. Well, now they added this, which is pretty handy. You can check this box, the or, and then you can put in a number of less than 30. You could put in a 5-day or 3-day cancellation period. Why they originally came up with 30 full days where the buyer's stuck or even the agent has trapped the buyer, even if the agent's the one that wants out, why they had 30 days doesn't make a lot of sense. That's why originally I advocated writing in some clause to shorten this, but now they put this in. Maybe they watched one of my videos, I don't know, but they put this in, which is good because there's really no reason for 30 days. And then we come down here. Now here's the poison pill. This is what I recommend watching out for. Now in another video, I talked about how the DRE just sent an advisory out to California licensees saying that there are scenarios in which a buyer can basically abandon their agent while they're negotiating on a property if they can't afford to pay their agent, and not being able to afford your agent when you're buying $1 million home is highly subjective in my opinion. I think it's largely going to be abused because to go that far and not be able to budget in the professional working for you is ridiculous. And now there's this, which kind of goes into the same conversation, which is that the buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay the broker. Okay, right there is a red alert. Why are you hiring a broker if you have no money to pay a broker? Furthermore, why are you buying a home in one of the most expensive states in the country if you have no money? So buyer's broker obligation to represent buyer in this transaction is contingent. So this is now a contingency in this form upon seller's agreement to pay the amount of compensation that you put up here. So maybe you put 2.5% or 2% or whatever up there. Well, now this whole agreement is contingent upon the seller paying that for the buyer. Now, this line here is insane. I'll tell you why. The reason why I think that this is such a crazy line is because the whole reason, this whole lawsuit that I think is I'll make it simple. The whole thing is absurd, but the whole premise of the lawsuit is that sellers had to carry the burden of paying the buyer's agent's commission. That was the whole premise that started this, all the chaos that ensued that ended in the finalized settlement last week. Well, right here, it puts it right back on the seller. What is the Association of Realtors doing? What are they thinking? why on earth would they put verbiage in here that puts us back on the seller and explicitly says, hey, all this other stuff is for show. It's really the seller that's going to pay you. And if the seller can't pay you, well, this whole thing doesn't even mean anything. This whole thing gets nullified, because that's what this is. This is a contingency, that this whole thing is subject to a seller picking up the buyer's tab. Think about that. The buyer is commissioning an agent to work on their behalf for free, working under spec, that they're going to get paid a commission eventually. Okay. And if the seller, if someone else can't pick up the tab, God forbid the buyer pay for professional services. So this whole thing is nullified because, or voidable, because it's contingent upon the seller picking up the bill. So this to me has no place in a form. And for agents, look, we got to work with the tools that we're handed. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. That's a separate conversation. But my advice is, do not ever check this box and incorporate this verbiage in this agreement. It's bad for realtors, but that's their problem, right? For realtor associations to have something in here that is so close to putting it back on the seller. But it's bad for us in terms of being a licensee, because why are we working with people that are claiming to not have money to pay for professional services, and are willing to say, and by the way, even though it's fairly customary, the seller will recompensate me with the concession, I'm not going to pay you. I don't have to pay you. I'll just void this thing out, and I'll just go right to the seller and have them represent, or have the listing agent represent me as a dual agent. Okay, so I could go on ad nauseum about this thing, but just avoid it. Danger, red zone, poison pill, skip it. Okay. All right, now this right here, this just basically cleans up some verbiage about timing of compensation, and this follows the other pattern of other documents that basically says, the transaction must close, or it would have closed had a buyer not sabotaged it. And this is regarding compensation, your commission. So it's basically saying, for you to be entitled to a compensation, it's subject to this timing, and this timing's outlined here. It's just a cleanup verbiage, nothing terribly consequential. And then it has a little bit more polishing, enters into a contract to acquire. The timing is of such payments subject to 4D, again up here talking about either closing or it's the same thing you'll see in the listing agreement as well. If a seller will owe a commission if the seller, for example, sabotages the transaction at the end of escrow. Maybe the seller decides they refuse to sign the grant deed. Same idea. So this just cleans up kind of existing verbiage that we've already enjoyed the protection of as agents in the past. I mean, they had the word the. I mean, you can see this is just tying up some very minute loose ends. And then down here, okay, so you have this cancellation, 2F, and let me scroll up for that real quick. All right, so 2F just talks about this 30-day change that we were talking about, okay? And let me go back down to the very bottom. We're almost done here. Okay, and this is just referring to entity buyers, an LLC, a living trust, a corporation. You get the idea. Who's the legally authorized signer? Side note, sometimes I see people sign the name, and this happens in DocuSign, sometimes by accident. They'll sign the name of the entity, the name of the trust, something like that. And you can't do that. You're not just writing an ABC Trust or ABC LLC in cursive. It needs to be an individual, a person that, Jane Doe on behalf of, and then name the entity. And that's it. And I'll do more videos on this later, but I wanted to draw your attention to this lineup here, right here, G2, because it's problematic to say the least. Thank you for watching.